and our server and online experience.
Hi, Tracy. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here, first and foremost. I'm Tatiana Kroll, and I'm a senior data tech analyst lead at Freddie Mac. And I lead a team of BI developers and business analysts who support both internal folks at Freddie Mac and external folks from a reporting and analytics perspective.
Yeah, hi. My name is Mason Wright. I'm the VP of IT at Tableau. So I live and breathe IT every day, and a big part of that, of course, our data analytics and using Tableau's product to help us see and understand our data.
Great. So as you all know, self-service analytics is now a common term, but it's become so common that it's no longer just this aspirational kind of concept that is only for visionaries to set their eyes on. And now all of you have either worked very closely with IT or you're in the IT space. So talk to me a little bit about how you've seen this transformation take place over time, and what are some of the challenges that IT has, in particular, has really had to overcome?
Yeah, so I'm happy to kick that off. So I'll actually tell you guys a personal story. Is when I started in the field many years ago, I always treated the relationship between IT and business, and I was always on the business side as a sort of as an adversary. So I always thought that the sort of handoff to IT was something cumbersome, time-consuming. It was always sort of an issue. And over time and today, more and more, the relationship with IT, I consider a partnership. And I think that's key because the work of IT has become so much more specialized that really we can't afford not to empower users to do the work that they can, given the tools. We're obviously at TC, so there's amazing tools, technology available. But the key is really to have that partnership and that bond where the line is not so harsh and there's an overlap, if you will, of skills between IT and business.
Tatiana, I have a question.
Yeah.
Having worked on the IT side for so many decades, I'm curious how you saw that evolution begin to occur from that distrustful relationship to now more of a partnership at Freddie.
Well, I think just like there's no magic pill, and with sort of any transition like that, the key is to shift in culture, right? So people have to build trust. If IT trusts that the business user is empowered and will do what they need to do without violating sort of any of the IT guidelines, you start sort of seeing the transformation. And conversely, if business trusts IT to empower them, to give them the right tools, but sort of let the strings go to let them do what they need to do to ultimately create more value, I think that starts building the transformation, and then that just happens over time.
Yeah, I love the way you talk about trust there, because I think it's the foundation to allow that relationship to evolve. In my experience, sometimes the IT team can get a little bit of nervousness around whether or not it's okay to let go. And it's not always about the ego. Maybe in some places it might be about the ego, but I think it's about wanting to make sure there's strong governance, wanting to make sure that we're doing all the right things for the right reasons and in the right way. And so then the question is, how do we get comfortable with the idea that our business leaders really are also trying to get to the same place? And I think, from an IT perspective, we like to try to operate with transparency. If we can be open and honest about what we do, I think we begin to create that level of trust, especially when we execute on the things that we agree to. And then we can be more comfortable kind of letting go. And at least that's how I feel. We just have to let go. Yeah. And then we can have the business become, I think, scale faster, be more efficient. They're the experts in what they do. We're the experts in what we do. If we can get together, build on top of that trust, we can really change things. And that's, I think, what I've seen as well. So it was interesting to hear your story of transition there.
Yeah.
And I think you said a key word there, Mason, which is governance. And it's important, of course, for IT because they're responsible for security and privacy and all those things. But I've seen the transformation happen on the business side a little differently, which is business users actually really welcome that when it happens in the right way. Because if you're a business user, with all the security, personal identifiable information, all that out there, the last thing you want to do is violate your company's security policies or your information policies. And so as a business user, you're actually able to do more when you know that there's an IT department watching out for those things.
Yes.
So what would you say are some of the challenges that come with a self-service model?
Well, I think Ellie touched on some of that, right, is that the more power you have, the more potentially can go wrong. Just having access to the data and having the right tools doesn't mean that you can get the right insights from the tool or from the data. So it's just really having that understanding, the metadata, the business glossary, access to all those things, and the governance, which is like, I consider it like a net that allows you not to fall into the deep end, presumably. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd love to add on to that. I think as soon as we start talking about self-service, we end up with departments that want to do things, and sometimes leaders in those departments want to do it their own way. And when they want to do it differently, you can end up with results that might cause problems when you cross those boundaries. So as a business, we want to see what's happening across all those departments, but if we don't have strong standards and if we haven't deployed a data dictionary that everybody can prescribe to, then all of a sudden you lose visibility across the business, whereas when it was centralized before, you might have had that visibility even if you didn't have the scale and the self-service. So as we get to self-service, we have to maintain those standards, we have to maintain the visibility and the transparency that we get across our business units.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great points. So, traditionally when we've been talking about self-service, we're oftentimes talking about the analysis itself, whether that means, you're getting the data in the hands of the business users so they can start doing their own analysis, or maybe you're just having dashboards appear in more places and so that people can make decisions. Today we're starting to see that definition of self-service kind of expand, and at Tableau in particular, we're investing in things like self-service data prep or data management. And so I'd love to hear kind of how you see IT's role in data and analytics in this ever kind of changing role of the self-service data model.
Yeah, maybe I can jump in on that one. I think we've been on this journey, and it started with the idea that you had to have a single group that owned this capability, it owned making data, answering questions, really. And so what happened was the business would ask questions and they have to wait. We have to go figure out what the answers are, and we'd answer back to the business. Pretty slow, pretty frustrating. Mm-hmm. And so we go on this journey where now we understand what the questions are, and we start to say, okay, well, here are your reports. And maybe we deliver them via email, or they're available via website, and so people can come and see those. So they now have access to that data, which is a nice step forward, but still doesn't really accelerate the business. And so when we start talking about getting that next stage of evolution, it's providing the ability for business users to really explore their own data. They can get in there and they can actually change the views and they can, I would say they can wallow in the data and understand what's important. But the next step after that is actually allowing them and giving the ability to actually be involved with their own data in the sourcing of the data. Because first you have to gather the data, you've got to store it somewhere, you've got to make it accessible. We can take self-service all the way out there. And this is where I think we really start to accelerate the business, because it's not waiting for us to do all the work for them, they can do it for themselves. So that evolution, that journey, I think is really important, and it's something that we've been focused on for a while now.
A second piece of that journey is the realization that not everyone is going to go do data management or even analytics, and we've known that for a long time. There's some people who just want to consume things on their phone or wherever they are. By giving the business users the ability to do some of the data management, you actually open up a whole nother realm of natural language, for example, the ability to give people, against a clean, structured data source, the ability to just ask and answer natural language questions and get an answer back. And so I think it's really having that awareness of, you've got some users who want to do their own analysis, some who want to go all the way into data management, and some who might never even approach what we call true analysis, but still need to get answers from data.
Yeah, I'm really glad you called out the different roles there, because I think you need all of those to be successful, but not everybody has all day to spend on them. And so I agree, and to kind of defining what's the right level of self-service that you need for your organization or even your own team. We will see different teams that will go to different levels of depth as well. And then how can you supplement the teams that don't want to go as far?
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you see this at Freddie?
Yes, and yes. So as far as the roles, one of the things that we do, so obviously my team sits in the business, but I like to say we straddle the line between IT and business, because we do, again, like we're describing some of those functions that IT would traditionally do. But what we do to empower users, and you're right, it's not a one-size-fits all. Even within a single company, you might have areas that wish to be very self-sufficient and others that want to be really hands-off. What we do is we find those people who are sort of the early adopters, right? and we give them training, we partner with them very closely, we teach them, and they become our ambassadors. They become our guerrilla style folks out there in the business areas. And then in some other instances, we're the ones doing all the work, and again, the tools allow us to be pretty hands-off once something is built, right, pretty automated, but we're still taking the ownership of sort of the end-to-end development lifecycle. So, yeah, happens both ways.
Now that's actually a great segue into my next question, which is, as we're starting to see this next wave, how do you ensure that your organization is implementing and deploying self-service analytics in a successful way? Like, what are some of those steps that are taken? You mentioned, Tatiana, finding those ambassadors, but what are some other successful kind of steps that you've seen? Oh, Ellie.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of companies grow up pretty widely with analytics, and I think one of the key things is this division of the role between IT and the business. If you approach the whole deployment thinking, my business users are the ones who are going to be able to ask and answer the questions in whatever manner they have. IT is responsible for governance and architecture and security and scalability and all those things. I think that's really a fundamental piece of the puzzle. And then you can let those two pieces kind of develop in the way they need to. IT gets more and more mature with the deployment. The business users can take training, start to evolve their own practices, but kind of getting that split set up front is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I could add on a little bit. I think it's important to understand a company's makeup, their culture, their pace, and then structure a program and be intentional about the steps necessary to kind of enable that organization at the right speed, to the right levels of depth. How much change can an organization absorb? But creating some alignment with the leaders of the organization so they can understand the benefits as you progress down that path. They can understand the scale that they're going to achieve, the velocity, how quickly they will get to answer their questions and understand their data. I think if you're intentional about it and you create a plan and you get alignment, you can figure out the right speed to go. And I think we talked already a little bit about finding, I think Tatiana was talking about, I can't remember the words you used, but essentially it's your friends in the business, the people who are willing to kind of pick up the banner and charge forward.
Ambassadors, yeah.
Your ambassadors, thank you.
Yep.
You can find those ambassadors and you can begin to roll. And then you can pick up speed over time as you go and get to that pace that the company's comfortable with.
Yep. And it's interesting because you have to strike a balance. We're talking about this. You touched on this earlier, the speed to market, right? That's the number one thing I hear from my business consumers. Like, what's not working for you today? What's not fast enough?
Yeah,
I can't get to my insights quickly enough. But at the same time, I work in financial services, Freddie Mac, obviously. We're also very risk averse. So they want it faster, but at the same time, they want it accurate. Mm-hmm. That's also a question we get asked. Is this right? Is this the correct information? Are these numbers right? Not close enough, but correct. So that balance is very important. You want to deliver faster, but you also want to be able to have the guardrails in place to deliver accurate information, not just fast information.
Yeah, I see that intention in a lot of organizations, and it's funny. Sometimes companies will say, "Well, we don't want to start with analytics until our data is perfect." And the truth is,
good luck.
Yeah, good luck. No, I've never seen perfect data. Maybe there's one data set somewhere in the world that's absolutely perfect, but data's never perfect. And so there's this question of how do you productively iterate and make progress when your data may not be perfect? And I think a lot of that for me is when I see companies do it successfully, it's data literacy. Because the consumer has to know not only how to interpret the results, but how to interpret kind of how accurate the results are and be able to be on that journey and understanding that, hey, we're early, so it might be this stage, or we're late, so you can trust them to this degree. Mm. And that's one of the foundational elements that I've seen companies have.
Right.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think sometimes I can see people stumble around, is my data understandable? Do I understand the structure of it so I know what I'm looking at and I can understand the insights that I'll draw from this data? And then also, you both mentioned accurate. Those numbers have to be correct, or I can't trust them. And if I can't trust them, I can't use them. Yep. But not, perfect is obviously a bridge too far. And then also, is the data fresh? Right? And so is it accurate and is it timely? Do I understand the state of the data at the time that I'm consuming it? This is really important too. Yeah. When we're looking at our data and we're trying to understand what's happening.
Right.
And again, this is back to the partnership of IT and business. Business typically, from what I've seen, has more context around the business, the concepts, but some of those other elements, you need IT, and so you need them working together to really have the full picture.
Yeah, and I think the tools have to support context.
Yes.
Is a really important word, and it doesn't help if the data stewards know what's going on in the fields and that the data's not fresh and maybe this data source is going to be deprecated. That information has to flow back to the business, and the business users likewise have to be able to provide their context back to the data stewards. And it's supporting that flow of kind of information exchange and collaboration that I think is really key.
Yep.
Yeah, and I really like that you pointed out that business relationship, but I almost go the other way too, which is more and more businesses are in charge of creating additional data, new data sources, or the life cycle of a data source will change. And sometimes IT is actually too far away to really know what's going on. And so as we empower through self-service the lines of business to manage not only the acquisition of data and storage of data, but also that life cycle of data.
Yeah.
Yep.
Really important.
But then the ability to take that data and share it more broadly across the enterprise is something we can leverage IT for, because a business area individually might not be able to do that.
It's funny, I talked to an IT leader at a tech company a few years ago who was doing something really interesting, which was she would actually look at the usage across their business of data sets and workbooks.
Mm-hmm.
And business users would bring their own data and create analyses, and the IT department would monitor this, and when a workbook got to a certain level of popularity, they would go to the author, and the authors were usually a little worried, thinking they were going to get shut down by IT. But in fact, what happened was IT would usually say, hey, I can see that you've brought in some data that's really interesting to other people. People are interested in this analysis. Let us help you keep the data fresh, make it scalable,
Yep.
clean it if need be, and kind of get it productionalized. And that was their primary production pipeline, which I think is a really interesting bottoms-up way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great story. That's also kind of leads into my next question. We've talked about this change and this shift and this wave of self-service analytics, but how do you know when you've actually been successful? What's the I made it
The
moment?
$1 million
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
I know. Right, so we touched on the tracking,
Sure.
right, and ability to see with very traditional. I'm talking very traditional reporting, when somebody would prepare a PowerPoint, right, and it would forward it in an email to an undisclosed distribution list, and who knows where that information goes? Who knows how it's forwarded? Who knows if it's even used? If you're on the analyst side of that, how do you know if you're effective, to your question, right? So with Tableau, with tools, we can see the usage. We can see frequency. If something's supposed to be used weekly, but it's used quarterly, something's missing. If something's not used at all, something's missing. And while it can be intimidating sort of to have access to that information, I think it's very empowering, because it allows us to ask the right questions. We can go back to our consumers and say, hey, this was built. Is it not serving the purpose anymore? Is it not adding value, right? And if it's not adding value, what can we do to add value? Without having that information, we can't ask those questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think success is an interesting question. What is success?
What is?
We're also metric driven, that we need to be able to say, in most cases, that if we have these 5 metrics and they all have a threshold or a target and we hit those, then we're successful, and that tends to feel good. But there's also a little bit of a subjective nature from a business perspective. Are we answering the business questions? Is the business able to answer the business questions? Are they answering them quickly enough? Is that enabling the business to move quickly and make decisions they need to make? Mm-hmm. So I think, it's really important to have our metrics to know how quickly, how fresh our data is, and how much a given data set might be viewed or manipulated, because that shows there's value there. And so these are all really important things. But then also I think we have to have a relationship that just says, hey, listen, are we really helping you get where you need to go? And that could be asked either from the IT side, the business side, or the business side to themselves, or back to IT. I think you can go in any of those directions and have that relationship and have that trust we talked about earlier, and be able to just really check in and say, are we getting where we need to go? And if we're not, then what do we need to do to get there? And then when we're talking about the metrics, one of the ones that sticks out to me that I think may not get enough airtime is the metric around creation of insights, right? So what's the velocity at which we acquire data, we turn that data into something meaningful, an insight can be drawn, a decision can be made, and understanding that life cycle, I always call it from inception to insight, And then figuring out, just like any other process improvement, how do I start removing waste from each of those phases? How do I get faster at this? How do I iterate at it? Because it increases the overall capacity of the system, whether that's IT or business.
Yep.
And then again, accelerates in time to market, as you mentioned earlier, so important,
Yes.
so key. So if we measure this, what is our time to market, and then we iteratively improve on it, I think everybody gets a chance to feel the benefits of that.
Yeah. Sometimes I look at how companies actually conduct their decision-making meetings. And you two both spoke to it a little bit, but when a culture of analytics kind of takes hold and people are used to using analytics, there will always be new business questions. We're never going to answer all the questions. But you can see the shift from people who come into a meeting, and a meeting is there to present an answer and convince people of a thing, versus a meeting is a time to understand the questions and have different people bring different perspectives. And when you get to the latter, and the idea of a meeting is just a time to explore an issue and different people to be able to present what they think is the right or an interesting way, to me that's a bit the measure of success.
So you talk to a lot of companies in the field. You have maybe some finger on the pulse of what's going on in the industry. Are you hearing any new desires around success measures and around how people think about their progress towards self-service or just insights in general?
It's an interesting question. The biggest thing I've heard recently is probably two. One is around the interest in enabling people with technologies that can help do some of the work for them. So analytics, data prep have always traditionally been just time-intensive endeavors. So a lot of companies, they want people to engage in them, but are there ways to save time? And sometimes that's enabled by some of the new technologies that are out there. The other, and it's a related theme, is companies are really interested in this theme of how do I get more people to understand data? And I think it's the success of self-service analytics. There are enough dashboards out there, enough people who can create analyses and do that companies are finding that to get more value, even more value from their analytics, they need to get them to more and more people. So they're looking at their entire workforce, people you might not traditionally think, were using data
Users,
before.
Yeah.
Yep.
One of the ones I've been thinking about lately, and I'm kind of curious what the panel thinks. As we talk about more self-service, we talk about end users doing more of their own analytics, right? And when we have teams that are doing kind of centralized, whether it's in the business or in IT, doing some centralized work here to acquire data, make it visible, maybe create dashboards, when we have the end users take on some of that load, does that create capacity within these teams to do more, to actually provide more thought leadership, to go deeper, to wallow in the data a little bit more? Is that a reality, or I'm just kind of curious what you see?
Yeah, I definitely see that happening. It's happened in my team. And I would say that sort of we talked about evolution earlier. The evolution that I think about for my team, and I keep always trying to drive this home, is we are very used to having reports where we say what's happened. What happened last month, what happened by this attribute or that attribute. But the business really wants to know why it happened. And that is the next level. So that capacity that you're talking about is us figuring out, again, how to use the tools, how to use our data, how to use our knowledge to not only tell the story of what happened, but also tell the story of why it happened. And then the next phase in that evolution to me is, given the what happened and the why it happened, what can't happen, what's likely to happen, right? And again, that's ultimately is getting those insights to the end users, to the people who use that information to make the decisions to generate the most value. But you have to delegate, or I should say empower users to take on some of those responsibilities to be able to take that on.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think for me, the fundamental thing is that nobody wants to go and just answer a simple question for someone else. IT didn't want to do it. Analysts and power users don't want to do it. We've got to get to a state in the industry where anyone can ask and answer a question of a certain complexity. And sure, yes, you may need more advanced skills to go really deep and do something deep or do data management. But we should get away from the idea that just to get a simple, hey, what were my sales last quarter and how did they compare to the quarter before? That should never involve another human being, just like you shouldn't need a human being to come type out your email for you.
Yeah, great points, great discussion. Thank you, Mason, Tatiana, and Ellie. This has been a wonderful discussion. Hopefully you all found it enlightening as well. These are three wonderful experts. If you want to get more information about best practices that Tableau has put together, check out tableau.com/blueprint, where you can learn more about how we can really start driving a data culture within your organization.